What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the latest film coming from A24, and that film is called Heretic. Written and directed by Beck and Bryan, this film stars people like Hugh, Sophie, Thatcher, Chloe East, Topher Grace, and more. So when I first saw the trailers for Heretic, I was pretty excited to check it out, most notably because you have Hugh in the film playing the bad guy, this creepy, eerie character. And if you're familiar with Hugh, you know he's big on rom-coms, you know that he's typically a pretty charming, likable actor, and very rarely does he ever play the bad guy. And even when he has played a bad guy in films, it's definitely a little bit more charming and a little bit more of a likable, kind of dim-witted, kind of comedic approach to playing a bad guy, especially when you think of something like Dungeons and Dragons. But here we are talking about Heretic, where he's playing a full-on creep, and I was really excited to check out this movie. But before we get into my personal thoughts on the film, let's talk about what this movie is all about. But one thing I want to mention right out of the gate is that this is coming from the minds of Beck and Bryan. Their last film, 65, starring Adam Driver, wasn't very beloved by audiences. I enjoyed the film. I did a review for it here on the channel. I didn't think it was top 10 of the year material, but I thought it was a good, fun dinosaur flick, and so I was excited to see what they were going to do here. Their biggest credits to their name definitely has to be the Quiet Place writing that they've done. So all that to say, I was excited to see what they were going to do here, writing and directing together once again for this new A24 thriller horror film. So let's get into what this movie is all about. The movie opens up and we're introduced to two Mormon sisters, Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton, played by Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East. The two of them are going to door, as Mormons typically do. They are part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they end up finding themselves knocking on the door of a man named Mr. Reed, played by Hugh. At first, he seems incredibly inviting, invites them in for pie, says, hey, get out of that rain, you know, let's talk about what you're here to talk about, only for them to quickly discover that they're going to be in a game of cat and mouse and are going to be questioning everything that they believe and everything that they know. Over the course of the film, this film will tackle the idea of faith, religion, but overall belief, and what gets you to believe something. Is it something you're indoctrinated into? Is it something that is taught to you? Is it something that you choose to believe yourself? Is it something you're controlled to believe? The film tackles belief, faith, disbelief, and all those various things. And while it specifically is honing into the idea of religion, and not just Mormonism, but religion across the board, the film in a lot of ways tackles what it is to believe something in general. Just believing something that somebody said to you, whether or not that's true. Is it a white lie? Is it, you know, something that you can fully believe them in? Whatever the case may be. I don't want to give too much away about this film, but the entire film is centered around the idea of belief, faith, disbelief. Where did that stem from, and what it means to truly believe something. And I'll start this off by saying that I thought that the earlier part of this film was awesome. I really enjoyed the intrigue. When it comes down to filmmaking, I think that this film is very well shot, and I think the performances across the board are pretty top tier. Hugh, as I mentioned before, was one of the things I was the most excited to see in this film, and I think he gives one of the most notable performances in his entire career that's definitely unique and different. He still employs that charm that he's incredibly well known for when it comes down to things like rom-coms or family films, but he's very much giving us a very eerie and creepy performance here, and he's a character that makes a lot of good points. He's a character that can be incredibly charming and likable in so many sequences, but he's also a character that you don't know if you should believe what he's saying. You don't know if you should go with what he's saying. Should you be afraid of him? Should you not be afraid with him? I think that Hugh does an incredible job of balancing this character who could have just been played as a typical creep, but instead they brought in the strengths of what makes Hugh a great actor, that charm, that likability, and allowed him to play with that in this way where you don't really know as an audience whether or not you should believe him. And even in moments where you feel like you shouldn't believe him, there's still this element about him that comes off charming, likable, and because of the tone of the film, a lot of those charming and likable moments oftentimes made him even more creepy. And I think his performance here is definitely one of my favorites in all of the movies I've ever seen Hugh in. Outside of him, when it comes to the two young Mormon women who are coming and knocking on his door, I thought that Sophie Thatcher was definitely my favorite of the two. She gives a really nuanced performance over the course of the film, and a character that I found myself enjoying more as the film went on was the character of Sister Paxton, played by Chloe East, a character that I think was a little bit underutilized in the earlier part of the film. I think the film does a lot to kind of focus on the other sister, Sister Barnes, played by Sophie Thatcher. I think that both of them get plenty of screen time, but Sophie Thatcher definitely is the face of this movie in a lot of ways throughout the course of the film. But there are segments in this film, especially in the latter half, that definitely focus far more on the character of Sister Paxton, played by Chloe East, where she has a lot of time to shine in this film. And I think that the way that these three actors play off of one another is really solid. There are some great moments of tension throughout the course of the film, and a lot of that is, of course, thanks to things like filmmaking and cinematography and things like, you know, the sound design and the musical score and just everything that kind of adds to the creep factor of a film like this. But you wouldn't have any of that without the performances, and I think the three of them very much need to be praised for how well they did this film. And in a lot of ways, this is the chamber piece. Majority of the film takes place in this house. There are a couple of moments in the film where we get to go to different parts of the house that make the film feel like you're in a new part of the movie. But for the most part, this film takes place in one house. And the film was interesting because it kind of reminded me of three other films. And I say this to not say that this film is exactly like these three other films, but just that I kind of got different vibes from this film that reminded me of three other films. And those films are The Human Centipede, as well as things like Barbarian and things like Don't Breathe. Three films that are wildly different. I wouldn't say that this film is necessarily just like those films, but there were elements about this film that reminded me a lot of those three films in terms of tone and some of the things that take place over the course of this film. And I enjoy all three of those films in their own way. I think there are things about them that I really, really like that are able to make some big, high stakes kind of tension moments. And I think that this film definitely employs a lot of those moments. Now, if I had to lean into any criticisms I have of this film, I would say that the latter half of the film is my least favorite part. And you would probably think, well, that kind of sucks. You're saying the first part was awesome and you didn't like the end. By no means am I saying this is a bad film, and by no means am I saying that I did not like the latter half of the film. I think that the film starts with a lot of intrigue because you have these two characters caught in a very weird cat and mouse kind of game, and there's a lot of mystery as to what's going to unfold. As time went on, I thought that the film was incredibly cleverly written in terms of dialogue. There are some moments that do bring up some really interesting questions around the notion of faith, religion, belief in general, not only on a religious level, but just the things we believe in our everyday lives and why we choose to believe them and how we get from point A to point B on a lot of different subjects. I think this film tackles a lot of that really interestingly and makes you kind of think about those things in yourself. It challenges a lot of things. Hugh Grant's character brings up a lot of valid points throughout the course of this film. But once we get to the latter part of the film, things have been expanded upon a little bit more and we're kind of more in the meat and potatoes. There were some elements about it that I did find to be a little bit predictable, and as we were coming to a close in the film, it felt like there was a lot the film wanted to explain, and instead of kind of showing us things or allowing us to kind of see things that were alluded to, it felt like they were kind of holding our hands a little bit too much in the latter part of the film, where it was explaining everything to us. It felt like it was just telling me everything. It felt incredibly expository in the latter half, and while I think the film has some really strong dialogue, especially in that first half, I thought that the dialogue almost felt like dialogue that felt like it was trying to be more clever than it was in the latter half. But to me as a viewer, it just felt like it was just telling me things for the sake of being like, oh, that's what it was. But I was already kind of deducing certain things in my mind. So there was this element of it just kind of feeling like it was talking to me versus actually me watching a movie and having things play out. By no means do I think that that's a bad thing in the sense that this ruins the movie. It is something that I do think is a negative, but I do think that the film continually kept me entertained. I thought it was very well shot, very well performed. There were some great moments of levity in there as well. There were some great moments to kind of break the tension that made me laugh. I thought that it, again, tackled some interesting subjects. I thought that it tackled religion and faith and all of those various things in a really interesting way. And as somebody who grew up in religion myself, it posed some questions that I have already asked myself and have asked others. And so I think that this film does a lot to really tackle the subject matter in a very interesting way, while also leaning into it being a thriller horror film that keeps you on your toes and keeps you engaged to see where it goes. The performances are exciting. There's some nice shocking moments throughout the course of the film. And while I do think that the latter half of the film lost me just a little bit, it ends in a very clever and interesting way. And I think ultimately this was a solid film. This was a solid, fun time at the movies. And I think if you're looking for something that feels a little bit unique and different in the world of thrillers these days, this is definitely one that I think you'll go to the theater, have a good time with. I don't know that everybody will love it, but I do think that there's going to be people who really do love it. I saw the film with my buddy, the Big Rob Theory, as well as his girlfriend Jen, and she really enjoyed it. She enjoyed it more than me, and so I like to kind of hear other people's opinions, because despite me kind of approaching this with a critical eye, I do recognize that there are certain films that people are just not going to be looking looking at it the same way I am, and I think that it's going to hit people in a different way. So take that as you will. But yeah, overall, I think that Heretic is a solid film. It's definitely worth your time. It has a lot of really great filmmaking, and I think it's one of the best things that the two directors here has definitely done. I really enjoyed it, and I really look forward to hopefully seeing more stuff like this in Hugh Grant's career. I don't want him to copy what he did here, but I would love to see him kind of branch out and do things that surprise me, because there's nothing I love more than seeing an actor or an actress play a role that is just completely and distinctly different than everything else that they've done, and I think that's exactly what Hugh Grant did here. So that's going to be my thoughts on Heretic. A big thanks to you guys for watching. Definitely leave some comments down below. Are you planning on checking this out? Have you already checked it out? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.